Welcome to the Pro to Pro podcast, where we explore the stories and strategies of successful entrepreneurs. I'm your host, Keith Aneni, and in each episode, I'll be sitting down with a different guest to learn about their journey, their challenges, and their insights into building a successful business. As a lawyer who works with industry leaders, I've seen firsthand the passion and drive that it takes to turn an idea into a thriving enterprise. And in this podcast, I want to share those stories with you, our viewers and listeners. Whether you're an inspiring entrepreneur, a seasoned business owner, or just someone who loves a good success story, you'll find something to inspire and inform you in each episode. So sit back, relax, and join us as we dive into the world of entrepreneurship and discover the insights that can help you succeed in your own business. Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Pro to Pro. I'm here with Dr. Joe Brown. He is a local plastic surgeon from Tampa. He's also a friend, and we're here to talk about a bunch of stuff. Welcome, Doc.
Thank you very much. I'm excited to be here, man. I'm looking forward to this.
I see you're in your scrubs. Did you come from Cases this morning?
I did. I had a case this morning. Did donuts with Dad at school this morning with the kids. They told us like 3 days ago, which is insane. So I had to move things around, which I'm always willing to do if I can. So I moved that around, did a case, and came straight over. Oh, great. So your company called Synergy MD, you're there, and I believe you have a partner, correct? Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, he's a dermatologist, Milan Lombardi.
Okay.
Great guy.
So, you're a young plastic surgeon. We got to know each other through the wives, through the connections in Tampa and all that other stuff. And you're a Jersey guy too, like me, which was something that, we had in common. On Pro to Pro, what we try to do is we try to dive in a little deeper to the person, the professional that we're talking with. And in your instance, everybody's got a preconceived idea of what a plastic surgeon is. And, how they may have gotten to that position. I think there's a stereotype that you were really smart in school. You were geeky, that, you maybe didn't play sports. You didn't do this. You didn't do that. I know that's not the case with you. You're kind of I don't even say you're an outlier, but I think there's a lot of people probably who had similar tracks, but you're a little different, is that you indicated to me you didn't really know what you wanted to do as you were growing up, right?
No.
So talk a little bit about that for us.
Yeah, I had no idea, man. Growing up, like I said, guy from Jersey, which, by the way, Jeremiah asking two Jersey guys to be quiet for a couple minutes, that may have been the hardest part of my day.
Yeah,
that may have been the absolute hardest part of my day.
Yeah, and using our hands too. We got to watch the mics.
We're both just like this. Is it over yet? So yeah, I grew up in Jersey. My father was a general contractor. Mom's a teacher, and
What part of Jersey?
Monmouth County, Middletown, next to Red Bank.
Yeah, South Jersey. I was a lifeguard in Seaside Heights. I think I may have mentioned that.
There you go. Yep.
Back in the day.
Yep. And so it was, growing up, for me, it was a kid with ADHD before ADHD was really like a thing. So my goals in life in elementary school, middle school, were just to get in the least amount of trouble as possible. That was pretty much it. I got good grades on tests, but I still remember, Mr. Degnan was my elementary school principal. I knew him well, unfortunately. He had my parents' phone number in his Rolodex right on his desk. I spent a lot of time in the principal's office, man. And, just growing up, work ethic was instilled young. I had no idea what I wanted to do in my life, but my father was always an incredibly hard worker, always trying to get me to go and work with him, earn a buck, and I just knew that whatever I was going to do, I would have to work hard. Middle school, high school, great group of guys that I hung out with, very, very close. None of them were going to college, so I didn't want to go to college. I didn't identify with kids that were going that path in life, despite the fact that I had good grades. But I figured it was a good thing to do. My parents pushed me to do it. And one of the things I'm really grateful to my parents is the fact that, number one, they really drove home work ethic big time. Number two, they held me accountable for my mistakes. So if my friends were grounded, or if they got caught doing something with us, they might be hanging out the next day. And I'd be like, what are you doing here, man? I thought you were grounded. And they're like, whatever. If I was grounded, there was hell to pay, and there was no time off for good behavior. Like, it was, this is what was done. This is the repercussion, and you're going to deal with it.
So you had accountability. Your parents taught you accountability.
Major accountability. And my parents didn't rule with an iron fist or anything like that. But if you cross the line, and got caught, you were going to pay for it. In college, I knew that I didn't know what I wanted to do. I had no idea. When I got to college, I was thinking I wanted to be an adolescent counselor because I thought to myself, well, here's a guy I grew up with a group of guys that I'm very close with, and I made these decisions. My friends made these decisions. One of my friends passed away from a drug overdose, and I thought maybe I can help other kids make better decisions.
Was that in high school or college?
It was my sophomore year in college, but it was my high school friend.
I had a friend too that passed when I think it was the first or second year in college. It was devastating.
I'm sorry to hear that, man.
Yeah, it's just crazy when you're young, right? How it affects you.
Yeah. It was terrible, just terrible. So I knew I wanted to help people. That was another thing that my father had instilled in me from a very young age. I worked construction with him starting when I was about 15 years old. I did it for 10 years. And I'll never forget, we were driving to work one day. It was like 5 o'clock in the morning, and my dad just pulls over out of nowhere. And I was like, what are you doing? He said, there's a car stopped on the road and someone's inside it. And as he goes to get out, I said, I can picture it like I'm watching a movie. I was riding shotgun, and I said, why are you getting out? And he just stopped, and he looked over his shoulder at me, and he goes, because it's the right thing to do. And he walked out to go ask this person if they needed help. And that was my dad. He would always stop and ask somebody if they needed help, whether it was on the side of the road or somebody struggling to put something in a car or something like that. Somebody needed a push. So that stuck with me. And so I did know that I wanted to help people in general. You fast forward to undergrad, sociology major, enjoying it. Took a biology course and really enjoyed it. And at the time, my mother was diagnosed with breast cancer. And that kind of, that didn't really plant the seed just yet, but it definitely added some focus to my life where I got way more focused on my grades. And then I started thinking to myself, well, what happens like if at some point, I always knew I wanted to be a dad. And I thought, well, maybe if I want to be a dad one day, I would like to be able to provide for a family should my wife say not want to work. I'm not saying that I wanted that life, but like I wanted to be able to provide it if that happened. Then I thought, okay, well, can I do that as an adolescent counselor? I don't know, but a doctor seems like they'd be better at doing that from a financial perspective. And that was it. So I didn't have this aha moment, gold light coming through the window.
Yeah.
And it was kind of, I wanted to help people. I liked science, and I thought I could earn a decent living. And so I went to my counselor in college and I said, I'm thinking of applying to medical school. She's the best thing in the world she could have ever done for me. She laughed in my face. And I was like, oh.
At the time, you're sociology major, right?
Yeah.
Which is basically benign as far as, you're just skating.
Very benign.
You're skating through life, right? In college and
very
just going
benign.
through the motions, really.
Yeah. I mean, and I was getting good grades, and I had a genuine interest in it. It's very interesting stuff. But if you're into people, like learning about people, understanding their habits, understanding social implications and ramifications, perceptions, things like that, like it was a natural interest for me. So it was a very easy thing for me to do. But it was the end of my sophomore year. So she was like, you're going to have to do all lab courses, 20 credits a semester, work through the summer, and you got to get straight A's while doing it. And I was like, all right, what else? And she looked at me like I was crazy. And I was like, is that all I got to do? And she was like, well, you got to take the MCAT. And I'm like writing everything down. I was like, tell me what I need to do. And she just kept laughing at me. So I was like, F this chick. It's fine.
So you end up using it as fuel, basically.
Totally.
Wow.
So I smoked every test I took for the rest of college, crushed my MCATs. And then I knew that I needed to add some volunteer work. So back in New Jersey, I went to Newark, which is a rough area in Jersey, as you know. And there's a medical school there. So I reached out to them to ask them if I could volunteer. And I was very good at speaking Spanish because I had a good friend I grew up with who was Colombian, working construction. I was like, maybe I'll go and volunteer in an area that's underserved for Spanish-speaking patients. And in interviewing with the primary care doctor who worked there, she was like, you know what? Come with me. And she comes and she walks me to this office and she goes, I want you to meet this doctor. And so I'm sitting there having a conversation with him. Turns out it was the dean of the med school at Rutgers. And he's like, let me ask you, have you applied? He's like, where are you looking to apply to? And young, dumb me, I'm like, I really want to go to NYU. Like, you idiots. You should have said, I want to come here, right? Yeah. But I was just honest to a fault, and I didn't really understand political games or anything like that. So this guy says to me, well, let me say this. I think if you apply here, early decision, you have a very high likelihood of getting in. I was like, oh, okay, that's good. Good food for thought. Thanks. So I get in the car and I call my father. He goes, how did it go? So I told him about this interview. He goes, holy crap, Joey, this guy just told you got into medical school. And I said, I don't know, Dad, I really want to go to NYU. And I was like, so I want to give myself a chance to go there. He goes, are you effing crazy? he's like, you gotta be kidding me. And I was like, no, I'm not kidding you. And he's like, why would you not do this? And I was like, I don't know. Cause I don't know that I don't feel like I've earned it. I feel like it's something that it almost feels like a handout. Like I happen to be in the right place at the right time. And in my mind, I wanted to go to NYU. It was like an arbitrary thing, but that's what I wanted to do. And my father had many conversations with me over the next couple of weeks.
I bet he did.
Oh yeah. And well, eventually I applied early decision to Rutgers, and I did, and I got in. And honestly, it was great, best decision I've ever made, because it put me on the path that I'm on now. And who knows where I would have landed had I chose differently, but I'm really happy with my life. So I'm glad I did that.
Well, what sounds to be the case is it seems that your dad was a strong influence in your life,
all day,
your formative years, young, all throughout your career, and you guys were really close.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I talk to my dad twice a week still.
You still do? Yeah.
Absolutely. And my dad, I pride myself on being a great father. I pride myself on being a great husband, and I pride myself on being a great boss / doctor. And I learned all of those from my dad.
Yeah.
My mom, don't get me wrong. I mean, I learned a lot from my mother as well. But the core values that drive me to say, you know, no matter how tired I am, if my kid wants to show me something or do something, I'm going to get up and I'm going to go do it. If there's work that's got to get done and can't wait until tomorrow, I'm just going to get it done. All of that stuff really I learned from working with my dad, and my dad spending so much time with me.
So when you get into Rutgers for medical school, when was the trigger for you to go into plastics? When did that come in?
If we rewind a little bit back to undergrad, so my mother had breast cancer, had a mastectomy, a removal of both breasts, and then she had chemo, she had radiation. I mean, she had stage 3C breast cancer, which is as rough as it gets until stage 4. And God bless her, man, she kicked butt. And her first plastic surgeon that she had was everything that you would think, as you said before, what you would expect in a plastic surgeon. In and out in a breeze, didn't listen, didn't care. She had all kinds of complications. And that is, I don't put that on him. That's on the radiation therapy, the chemo, and everything else, because stuff does happen. He just didn't care. And he did nothing but further, like when I was in undergrad, I was having a beer with my buddy on a Saturday watching the game, and he was like, you coming to this party tomorrow? And I was like, no, I got to study for the MCAT. And he's like, the MCAT, what's that? And I said, it's the test you take to get into medical school. And he was like, he spit his beer out. and he's like, medical school? He's like, you're going to go to medical school? And I was like, yeah, I'm going to try. He's like, what kind of doctor do you want to be? And my answer was, I don't know, not a plastic surgeon. Those are my exact words. I'll never forget it.
Wow.
Sitting in Borman South, second floor dormitory, I said, I don't know, not a plastic surgeon. And it was because of her experience with this guy. So you fast forward now you go into medical school. My mom had all these complications. She ultimately said, screw it, I just want them out. So she got rid of her reconstruction. She was flat. And I was having a conversation with her. This was during my 3rd year of medical school. When you're in your clinical rotations. So the first 2 years are didactics. You're just there studying, taking tests for like 100 hours a week or so.
So for people who are listening and watching, the first 2 years is predominantly books and classroom study for somebody in medical school?
Correct. So you do some clinical rotations to get exposure, and different schools have different programs for that. But the first 2 years of medical school are largely geared up to boost your fund of knowledge to understand chemical pathways, medications, disease processes, treatments for the disease processes, anatomy, physiology, how the body works, how the body fails, and how to treat it and things like that. And at the end of your 2nd year, you take this what's called step 1 of your USMLE licensing exam. In order to become a licensed physician in the United States, you have to pass USMLE exams step 1, step 2, and step 3. Step 1, purely fund of knowledge based. And so your first 2 years, so the way some students ran it was you would go to lectures Monday through Friday from about 9 a.m. until 2 p.m. And then you take your tests as they come, similar to college, but probably 10x the volume of information. What I did, there were like 3 of us that had similar backgrounds, like had jobs growing up, didn't really paint ourselves with the stereotypical medical student paintbrush. And we just had a different outlook on it. And so workers, kind of like hustlers. How do I figure out the most efficient way to get this done? Like my study buddies, no one really thought we were smart, but we got the best grades in our class.
Yeah, that's
because what we did, we would wake up at 5 a.m. We'd go bang out like a 90-minute workout. Then we would go to school, and while they were in lecture, we were memorizing the scribed notes from that lecture from last year, memorizing it. So by the time class got out for our classmates, we knew everything cold. Then the scribes from this year would come out, and we would update our knowledge base based on this year's lectures. Sometimes there was nothing to update. We just had it locked. But that was our schedule. We would work out. We would study from 7 to say 3. We'd go do something fun for an hour, and then we would study from 5 until like 9.
I got to tell you a funny story based on that.
Yeah, let's hear it.
I had a buddy who I went to law school with. We did something very similar. We were two little knuckleheads in law school, bodybuilders, working out back in the day, and it was the mid to late 80s for us. And there was no such thing as an attendance policy back then for school. So we figured it out pretty quickly. The tests from they would keep the tests and exams available from that took place the year prior, and there would be floating outlines. And I think they called them at the time in law school manuals or something. There was these like treatises of summaries of the topics within the particular class. So my buddy and I, and we also we couldn't handle studying in groups with people because we had a different approach. We weren't like fretting over things like people would get paralyzed by their fear of studying. So we kind of figured it out early that wasn't going to be us. We kind of studied alone, frankly. Each of us we studied by ourselves, and everybody learns differently, right? I'm not criticizing, but that's what we figured out soon. So for us, we were hardly ever there. We were never there. And then we would show up for the exam and get good grades and move on. And they didn't even think we were going to appear at graduation. Right. Because they were like, oh, where's he? What are they working out? And my buddy actually won the Mr. New Jersey during that period of time too.
That's awesome.
So it was like one of those things for us where we figured out what worked for us. And in law school, you have one exam for the whole year. It was one thing. And they would introduce just different subjects. Like if there was an elements of a contract, you had to figure out the elements of a contract. So you'd read 400 pages on the first element, 400 pages on the next element, 400 pages on the next. So you can get lost in the weeds.
Sure.
So we figured it out pretty quick. Why the hell are we so focused on 1 or 2 elements? We need to learn all 4. Why don't we learn them right away? And then we'll be ready for the exam because that's what they're going to test us on.
Right.
So that's kind of how we went through things. So I didn't mean to segue it off, but we have a very similar way of handling things, I think, which is unusual because most people would think that, no, you're in a book 24/7 with these groups doing your thing.
You know, and it's funny because when we went to school to study together, very similar to you, the best investment I had in med school were my Bose noise canceling headphones. And so we each had them. And he would listen to music. I couldn't study and listen to music. I would hook mine up to my iPad with the roller, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, yeah.
I would hook mine up to the iPad roller, and I would have my Thunderstorm on repeat. And I would pretend like it was raining outside, and I would study. And at the end of each section, we would look at each other, and if we were ready, we would take our headphones off, and we would just start testing each other. And until we got everything locked in, we would move on to the next one. And so, and that, as you said, that worked for us. The average person in an hour is going to retain about 20 minutes of what they hear. That means that 40 minutes of the lecture that they're listening to is completely wasted time.
Oh, it's Peanuts, the Peanuts teacher.
It's wasted time. Yeah. And so we didn't want to waste time, and we got a really good system with it. It was great. But yeah, so the first 2 years are didactics, and then the second 2 years are clinical. So,
and what does that mean?
That means that you do rotations. So you do rotation internal medicine, surgery, OBGYN, neurology, psychology or psychiatry, pediatrics.
So you get exposed to the different disciplines in medicine.
Correct. And usually there are 6 or 7 core rotations. And some of those rotations are 4 weeks. Some of those rotations are 8 weeks. Some are 9. And then usually they would give you, say, 2-week elective rotations. And that's where you would go and say, I might be interested in neurology, or I might be interested in ophthalmology. During my 3rd year, early on, my mother was going to go meet with another plastic surgeon to have her breast or her chest be made more smoothly, because when she had everything removed, she had all these scar wads on her chest. And the last thing you want as a cancer patient are lumps and bumps. So she called me to tell me she was going to meet this other plastic surgeon. And I said, all right, well, when are you going? I'm going to come down and meet this guy. And I was fully prepared to drag a plastic surgeon across the desk. Like I already had animosity towards this man. I'd never met him before, just because he was a plastic surgeon.
Yeah.
So I went down with her and I went with her to this consultation, and we're sitting in the waiting room, and all of a sudden the doctor comes walking out and he says, hey, listen, I just wanted to apologize and let you know I'm running about 20 minutes behind. I've got a patient with an issue. If we need to reschedule, we can reschedule, but I wanted to apologize. And my mom was like, no, we'll keep it. And he walked away, and I looked at my mother and I was like, what the heck just happened? Like I was like, a doctor
that cares.
Recognizing that he's running behind, like that's psychotic. So then we go in for the visit, and I was floored by this man, by his ability to listen. He just sat there, and I could tell that there was nothing else in the world in that moment other than my mother. And it blew me away. I had never had a doctor interaction like that before in my life. And when she was done, she said everything that she said that she wanted. He said, okay. He said, may I ask you a question? And she said, yeah. He said, are you happy? And she was like, am I happy? Yeah, I'm as happy as I can be. He's like, it's kind of a tough answer for a 48-year-old woman because, she's young. And she was like, well, what do you mean? He said, do you find that there are challenges to not having breasts? And she said, well, yeah, of course. Like I can't find a dress that fits appropriately to go to my daughter's graduation. I can't wear V-necks. I can't wear bathing suits because everything falls away. And then my scars are just sitting there. She's like, but I've learned to live with it. And he said, well, what if I told her there were other options available that the other surgeon had never discussed with her? And you fast forward now, and she ended up having this procedure done where her latissimus muscle and a paddle of skin was moved to the front of her chest to bring non-irradiated tissue into an irradiated area on her body so she could have reconstructed breasts. And it changed her life. It was a really neat thing for me to see. Now, if you fast forward into my surgical rotation during medical school, I was scrubbed into a mastectomy with a surgeon because you had asked about the clinical rotations. That means as a student, you're basically at the intern's heel, following them throughout the hospital, trying to make their life easier. And you scrub into surgeries or you assist with procedures and things like that. And the breast surgeon, we finished the mastectomy, and a plastic surgeon was coming in to do a latissimus flap, what my mother had done. And I really wanted to see the procedure. So I asked the plastic surgeon, hey, is there any chance I could stick around and just see what this is? My mother had this. I want to see it. And she said, stick around. She's like, why don't you scrub? She's like, I don't even have an assistant.
Wow.
Yeah. Her name was Stephanie Cohen up in Hackensack.
Oh, okay.
And I was like, okay, sweet. And this surgeon was awesome. She was down to earth. We had amazing conversation. She just seemed like a normal human being. And we got along great. She taught me how to sew. And she said, whenever you want, come scrub my cases. So I said, all right, great. And so I started stalking out her cases because I was having so much fun in the operating room with her. And she invited me to go to her office with her. So I went and I shadowed her in the office, did a rotation with her and her partner, Rick Winters. And meeting the patients with them in the office, I realized, wow, like this is, you really can help dramatically improve somebody's quality of life through plastic surgery. And unlike my preconceived notion of what plastic surgeons were like, in my mind now, a good plastic surgeon actually ingrains themselves into the life of their patients by getting to know them so that they can impact it. Like, how is this change really going to help you? And how do we best achieve that for you? One of the things that I really wanted out of going into medicine was I wanted to be able to get to know patients. So I knew I wanted to work with my hands from having worked construction for so long, but I didn't want to be a specialist that was in and out and never really got to see patients much. Like, for example, like an interventional radiologist might never have may have 5 minutes of conversation with a patient, and they're happy to do that. That's their personality. There's nothing wrong with that. But for me, I like to get to know people. It's one of my favorite parts of life in general. And I wanted that to be part of my job. And when I realized that you could get that with plastic surgery and dramatically change someone's quality of life, and beyond that, think outside the box. If you have appendicitis, you take your appendix out. If you have cholecystitis, you take your gallbladder out. Like there's a very algorithmic approach to a lot of medicine, but in plastic surgery, you have your instruments, your knowledge of anatomy, and the rest is like, all right, well, this looks like this. How do we make it look like that? And you get to think outside the box. You get to operate head to toe. And that's how I decided I wanted to be a plastic surgeon. I just thought it was a great field.
It's an incredible story because you shared with us initially about your desire to help people, and you were thinking about adolescence and doing something with kids where medicine's not even an issue for you. Unbeknownst to you, your father is teaching you about being a good person and how to deal with people and how to do the right thing. Unbeknownst to you, you get yourself exposed to a doctor who does things all the wrong way, something you would never want to do. So you lose that taste for that. Then fast forward your mom and dealing with the situations, and then you see, you get experience with another doctor who has a completely different shift in your mind, and it connects like a synapse with you. Yeah. This idea of, wow, my passion is actually going to be fulfilled in doing this type of work, with having an ongoing relationship with a patient and making a change for a patient. And basically you're hitting all the nails with regard to your personal being, in that you're covering the social aspect of it. You're doing something that you like doing. You're, from the being a contractor's son, working with your hands, and you're making somebody feel good. And so it fills your cup up as well. It's incredible how it just metamorphosed into something like that to what you're doing now.
Yeah, I tell you, I've been happier in life the last several years than I've ever been in my entire life. But if I could get any happier, you just made me happier. You summarized it so nicely, man.
Well, you in a way, you allowed yourself to grow. You seem to have an understanding of what drove you. The discipline was instilled in you at a younger age about work and the consequences of not working through, your father, your mother disciplining you if you did something wrong, whatever. So you've got that going on. But as you're going through life and deciding what you want to do, and with the people fueling you and saying, naysayers telling you not to, no, I want to do this. And so you follow that. And then that light comes on when that time period comes in your life, and you're like, wow. And then everything starts to connect, and you're like, okay, I'm enjoying this now. This is unbeknownst to me in helping people, this is kind of what I want to do. And it's really interesting. I always tell people, for me, like, why'd you wanted to be a lawyer? How did that happen? I always wanted to be a lawyer. And the oddest thing is, I wanted to be a lawyer, but I didn't know what it meant. I thought that being a lawyer meant that you had this special key. And if somebody came to you with a problem, you took this key, you went to your back room, you opened up a door, and you went in there and you grabbed the answer. And you brought the answer back to the person, right. And you were the savior for that particular issue.
If only,
if only,
if
right?
Only, right?
It has nothing to do with any of that, obviously. But as I went through the process, there were obviously elements of being a lawyer and dealing with people for me, and the social interaction and the problem solving and the logical and analytical side of it stimulated me. Litigation side was something that I really fell in love with too, because I do have a tendency to be, I don't say confrontational, but I like to look at two different sides of something. But I also am open to learn, and that's something we can talk about as well. Let's fast forward. So you obviously become a plastic surgeon through this journey. What brought you to Florida?
My wife.
Okay.
All my wife, man. So I met Ashley before med school. So when Ashley and I met, we met in April of 2005. I started medical school in August 2005. And my wife is just, she's my best friend. I always say she is the funniest and hottest dude I've ever met. And God bless her, she is a saint. She is more patient than any human being I've ever met. And she not once has ever thrown my work in my face, complained that I didn't have time for her while I was studying, made me feel bad about being on call. She's always been there to either give me a pat on the back when I needed it or a kick in the ass when I needed it. And, she's just been immensely supportive. And so when we met in New Jersey, she was working in New York at the time. And then we were in a residency, at Ohio State. We had our first son there. And, I asked her, I said, where do you want to go when we're done? And I always say we, because we went through residency together. It wasn't a one-man show. And it was because she was there with me, man. She was there with me. You know, a lot of times you would say, well, and people would say this, you know, you worked hard and, you know, you're the doctor, you did the residency, it should be where you can work and da da da. And I told my wife, I said, look, wherever you want to go, if I can't find a job, I will slam a flag into the ground. Like, I don't care. So wherever you want to go, it's your call. Because we spent 4 years of medical school, 6 years of residency where I had to be. Where do you want to be? And she wanted to come back to Florida. Her parents are about an hour north of here. Her sister's about 2 hours west of here. And my only request, I was like, if we're going to go down to Florida, I need to see the water.
Yeah. It's a real interesting subject that you're bringing up, because we talk about it a lot on the podcast. I've spoken many times about the successes that I've had in life because of my wife. You hit the lottery early, very early, with regard to your wife. I think that a partnership is so deep and needed for people to be successful. And I think that in many times it's never really discussed for whatever reason. We always see the one person who may be on the front end, and we don't recognize that there's another person behind the scenes, possibly there helping through the way. And I think it gets lost somehow for whatever reason, that we don't talk about this like we should talk about it. I mean, your wife essentially sounds very similar to me. My wife's my best friend. And a lot of people don't understand that concept. And some people find it either dysfunctional or have a judgment about it. Why are you spending so much time with your wife? What do you mean she's your best friend? I don't understand. I mean, what, don't you have your own lives? Of course we have our own lives. I said, but we grow together, we respect each other, and we're on this journey together. For me, I wouldn't be able to do what I'm doing if I didn't have the support of my wife, just like with you. And I think that what's happened, because I was raised in a very traditional setting. My parents were married for 40 plus years before my dad passed of cancer. I really very rarely saw them argue. People tease me, oh, it was Beaver Cleaver life for you, whatever it was. But one of the things that I did learn was about respect in a relationship. And unfortunately, because I was so focused on my career, I don't believe that I grew emotionally as to have an understanding of what it meant to be in a healthy relationship. I was so linear with my practice of you know, I was going to be a lawyer, I was going to do this, school, this, the other thing. I didn't take the time, which appears that you did. You figured it out early on. And as a result of that, I made poor decisions in relationships until I met my wife. But when I met my wife, I had this greater appreciation of what not to do.
Sure.
And so you're younger, you got lucky, and it's clear. And we'll talk more about it too, because I know there's some things recently that came up that really was supportive and showed that with you. But it was reciprocal, right? You made the decision to say, okay, you've done enough. And that's what partnership is, right? You've done enough helping me get to this point. We're in a partnership. You're listening. It's that empathy. It's just that sense of true respect among couples that we don't see that often. You're not taking score of each other as far as you did this, I get this, I get, you get that. It's this flowing. It's like a brook, right? Water's flowing. So share with us, like you guys are still together, madly in love. You have your kids. You decide to come here. I had a very difficult time when I first moved to Florida from Jersey. I felt like it was in a movie from My Cousin Vinny when I came here, because I felt like I was getting stereotyped big time. And my accent has quelled. I used to have a really heavy accent, so tell me a little bit, how about when you came down?
My accent definitely comes and goes. So I found that I'm like a morpher. Like when I'm in New Jersey, it pops. If I get really angry, which doesn't happen that often anymore, thankfully, it pops. But the longer I'm away from it, the more it subsides. I will say, just real quick about the empathy thing, that's huge. So there are a lot of doctors that don't make it through residency, still married. The divorce rate is really high. And I think that a lot of it is lack of empathy for your significant other. So for example, like when I came home from call, it didn't matter if I worked 30 hours, I'd be shot. My eyes would be bloodshot. I'd have literally zero energy, but I would never just drag my feet through the front door and go fall face down in the bed. I would always make sure I kissed my wife hello. I'd sit on the couch and I would fight tooth and nail to sit there and look her in the eye and ask her how her day was, what's going on. Now, I failed a lot, There are a lot of times where she told me, she's like, I can't even begin to tell you how many times like you've fallen asleep mid-sentence in a conversation with us. She said she'd look over and I'd have like spaghetti on my chin and I would literally fall asleep mid-sentence. But you try, you try, because otherwise I'm dismissing the loneliness that she must have felt, while I'm out working 100+ hours a week.
That also makes you a better doctor too, because I think that set that you have, that emotional you're in tune with other people, and that probably you don't even realize it, but in your practice, that's why you have such a great reputation, and you have, your patients love you so much, is because you're in tune with their needs, and even if you're exhausted, even though you may have all these other things going on, when you're in the moment, you're capturing, you have them, they have you in that particular moment.
Yeah. And I appreciate that. That means a lot to hear you say that, man. It hit me this morning. I was at a red light on Hillsborough Avenue and I just happened to look left, and I don't know what it was. I almost had like this like philosophical moment where, you look around, you see traffic and there's all this hustle and bustle. And to you as the individual, that's all it is, right? It's just bees, hustle and bustle. But in every seat in which there's a person, in every car, there is the weight of that person's day, their week, their month, their whole life. Every person around you, no matter what you're dealing with, every person around you has their own immense weight. And I had this moment where I was just like hyper aware I was like, well, all these cars stopped. I was like, oh my God, I wonder, just think of the weight of life that is in this 20 square foot radius right now, right? And when you think about that, it's to try to justify being dismissive to someone in general, let alone as a physician, to be dismissive to a patient who is there in a state of maximum vulnerability, seeking help. I can't wrap my brain around doctors' ability to just breeze in and out of a room without even like looking a patient in the eye. Like, I get it. I know it's a business. Like, I run my own business. I live and die by my sword. But for God's sake, like this person is an entire person, okay? Yes, like it's your time, but the thing is like that they're here for that. They have purchased your time. For me, it's easy. Like, how can I help? And I can't help you unless I know what you're dealing with. So I got to get to know you. And, but I think empathy is important, I think, in so many aspects in life.
Do you think that over the years you've become less tolerant or more tolerant in that approach? In other words, because from my experience in dealing with doctors, and I've dealt with them over the years, and unfortunately more in litigation type settings when I have to take depositions, but I do get opportunities to conference with them, and I'm friendly with them. And when they're disarmed and they know that I'm not necessarily there to, criticize or be the Monday morning quarterback, I can disarm them a little bit. But I've sensed that the older doctors, especially most of the time it's orthopedics that I end up dealing with, but the older doctors, it's the dynamic of dealing with venture capital that comes in and buys their particular practice. If they've become like an indentured servant to a new entity, the pressures of the whatever type of debt they may have accumulated over the years, living large. I call it the golden handcuffs. There's so many variables for a doctor that goes on. The change of medicine. So, and I bring this up because I've noticed that the older doctors tend to become much less patient, and you're young, so hopefully you won't be, affected by your length in practice.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to happen to me for a couple of reasons. Number one, I have a cash-based business. I am not dependent upon insurances, and because I'm not dependent upon insurances, I am beholden only to my patients. That's huge. Yeah, huge. And I think one of the reasons why you see it in orthopedics is because orthopedics has become a volume. Most medicine is now volume based, right? How many patients can I see in a day? If my max is 15, how many patients can I see in a day with an extender? How many extenders can I have by state law under my name?
And let's go back, because you're talking about things I get, but we want the people to understand. Extender would be somebody like a physician's assistant. Correct. Or what they call it, a physician associate now, I think now, or a nurse practitioner or a nurse, or generally it would be somebody who's signed under
Correct.
them, and then they get a higher reimbursement rate.
Correct. So it's basically I am one physician, but in bringing on this, like a mid-level, whether it be a nurse practitioner or a physician assistant / associate, those experienced professionals can now practice under my name, and they each can see 15 patients. So now my what's called NPI, National Provider Identification Number, or National Physician Identification Number, which is what the insurances look at for billing, can now bill 45 patients in a day. Okay. But the problem with that, and why this leads, I think, to physicians seeing patients just as, products on a conveyor belt, is that once that happens, you talk about handcuffs, man. Now all they need to do is say, all right, well, we're going to cut your reimbursement by 10%. It's like, all right, well, now I need to see X more patients in order to stay afloat. We need to change the laws to say, okay, now instead of 3 mid-levels, I can get 4. And so instead of boxing out the insurance companies and going to cash, which takes a major leap of faith in a market-based structure overhaul, you have to play the game. And so I think there's a lot of displaced frustration just in the profession and on the profession in general that ends up falling on the patient, unfortunately, because the patient is now in the middle of a corporate-owned, physician practice and a corporate-owned insurance-based practice where you have board of directors that are looking at the bottom line for their shareholders, and this important component of the doctor-patient relationship is lost. And the reason why it's lost is because it's diluted with other involved bodies that have no vested interest in the success of the relationship between the doctor and the patient. That's why, so for me, I don't think it's going to happen because I don't have that pressure. I've got my time, I've got my income. It has nothing to do with any corporations.
That's a really good point you brought up, the fact that you're a cash basis and it's elective and the people are coming to you electively. I want to touch on a subject because I think there's a lot of confusion out there. I have a consulting side of my practice in which I do medical spa consulting, aesthetic consulting, all over the country, actually. And a lot of people don't understand when they see this term cosmetic doctor, and they see plastic surgeon, cosmetic doctor. There is a distinction because obviously cosmetic doctor, from a formative perspective, their under years could have been in different disciplines before they became a cosmetic doctor. And there are specific boards that are recognized, right?
Sure.
So can you go over that a little bit for our listeners and our viewers as to the distinction and the training that is distinctive between a plastic surgeon and a cosmetic doctor?
Absolutely. So for a cosmetic surgeon, and the word cosmetic is used all over the place.
It's ubiquitous. So it's really, yeah.
Yeah. So it's basically, you can have an endocrinologist calling themselves a cosmetic physician. You can have an internal medicine doctor calling themselves a cosmetic physician. You can have, OBGYN. It doesn't matter. They just call themselves cosmetic, whatever. Now, cosmetic surgeon is a specific term that the group of cosmetic surgeons are trying to create clout and legitimacy for. And for years, there were no prerequisites. So cosmetic surgeon, there's this thing called the American Board of Cosmetic Surgery, which truly is nothing more than an LLC. Like I could create American Board of Joe Brown Sandwiches and make an LLC for it. Boom, it's a legal entity, right? And I could say, I certify Keith, you're now board certified. By what? By the American Board of Joe's Sandwiches, right? But you just say board certified. That's it.
Sure.
Okay. Now, American Board of Cosmetic Surgery typically is a quote unquote 1-year fellowship, where really it's an observership. And there are not many places in the country that have it. It's not overseen by something called the RRC, which is the governing body that looks at all residencies in the program that are ACGME accredited. That's the American College of Graduate Medical Education. And that is what standardized essentially the beating heart of medicine in the United States. Exams that they take, research requirements, case requirements, all that. The American Board of Cosmetic Surgery has nothing to do with the ACGME. It has nothing to do with the RRC. There is a governing board. It's called the American Board of Medical Subspecialties. That is what determines the fact that there is, in fact, an American Board of Medicine, an American Board of Surgery, an American Board of Plastic Surgery. The American Board of Medical Subspecialties does not recognize the American Board of Cosmetic Surgery.
And that's where you get the board certification, where you have to take tests, you have to show work that you've done, and you have to meet certain criteria.
For me to become certified by the American Board of Plastic Surgeons, which I am, I had to complete a residency in plastic surgery that was accredited by the ACGME. Okay, that's the, like I said, that's the national board that oversees everything to make sure that these residencies are legitimate. In that residency, I had to complete a certain volume of cases. I graduated with like close to 3,000 surgeries when I graduated residency, and it has to be certain types of cases. So I had to have X amount of head and neck reconstruction, X amount of hand reconstruction, X amount of cosmetic surgery. And in the cosmetic surgery, they had to be X amount of face, breast, body, limbs, like you name it. And all of that is overseen by the RRC. The American Board of Cosmetic Surgery loves to say that they're the only board that specializes in cosmetic surgery and they need all these cases. We spend 6 years learning about all of this stuff. It's not a 1-year thing.
So that's the difference in part.
Oh, it's huge.
Yeah, but I mean, the distinction, obviously, they form this LLC, this business that they're going to basically self-regulate and self-promote, not from a recognized entity.
Correct.
Obviously, from what you're talking about with the plastics. So it's a 6 years of.
There are two ways to do it. It's
okay.
It's 6 years of an integrated plastic surgery residency, or you can go a classic route, which means you've completed 5 years of a general surgery residency typically, and then you would have to do a 3-year fellowship dedicated to plastic surgery in addition to those years. So if you didn't get a straight 6-year program out of medical school, which is very competitive and hard to get, then you would do this longer road of about 8 years of training, plus or minus a year or two of research. Once you completed that training, now you're out in practice. You are what's called board eligible. Correct. So that first year of your practice, you are in what's called your case collection period. Okay. You're also studying for your written board exam. Your written board exam typically is taken in, I want to say October. If you pass that, then you potentially get to sit for the oral exam, which is the subsequent year. And during that first year of practice, you need to collect a minimum amount of cases, but also a range of cases. You have to demonstrate that you have capabilities within the main scope of plastic surgery, okay? If you hit your numbers, then they will select from those cases just 5 random cases. Of those 5, and when I say random, they will look for cases that stand out. Like if it took you 4 hours to do a breast augmentation, they're going to pick that because they're going to want to know why it took you 4 hours to do something that should take 1, maybe 2 at most. They will look at complications. If you have a complication, they're going to pick it because they're going to want to know what happened, what you did to fix it.
When you say they, who is on this board that's going to be asking these questions?
The American Board of Plastic Surgeons.
So there'll be other surgeons, plastic surgeons?
Exactly. Experienced plastic surgeons who have been, in good standing, that are part of the board of oversight that determine are these surgeons safe enough to be deemed plastic surgeons. But it's not just safety. They look at technical capabilities. They look at your judgment, big time focus on judgment. They look at your ethics. I'm going to quote Jerry Seinfeld. It is the professional equivalent to a complete rectal exam.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
So you have to demonstrate that you know what to do. And then they just go through. They're like, tell me about this case. And you start telling them about it. What happened with this? Why'd you choose that? What would you do differently? Do you think this is a good outcome? How did you come up with your billing for this? How did you come up with the coding for this? And they will push you. Like I have a friend who failed his exam, despite the fact that he said the right thing. This patient had a melanoma on the face. He had a plan. He said it, and they said, you sure you would do that? And he said, yeah. And they said, you're sure? That's how you want to do it? You wouldn't do this instead? And he was like, well, I mean, they're like, because blah, 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 blah. And he said, okay, well, no, I'll do that instead. Fail. So they test you to make sure that you will stick to your guns and do the right thing, regardless of outside influence.
Yeah.
It is in my opinion, I don't see any other way to do a generalized certification to demonstrate capability and sound judgment.
I hate to be so blunt about it with all your medical terminology, but you're filtering out the weak.
Oh, totally.
You're filtering out people who shouldn't be in that particular role.
That's exactly right.
And in spite of their perceived arrogance or skill set. I mean, it's one of those things because it's a holistic approach, right? You may be the most incredible tactician with your hands,
right,
but you have no way to analyze a problem.
That's exactly
so
right.
So guess what? You're not in that role. Maybe you're in a role of microbiology or something. You know what I mean?
Again, judgment. even if you can execute that surgery, you need to know what can happen, right? So it's the judgment, it's the knowledge. They're testing all of this stuff.
We could get into this discussion. I don't know enough about it, but why do you think either the AMA goes so hard on different areas, right? They go so hard, you know, they'll go hard and beat up on, you know, they call them mid-levels, which I don't even like that term. When you have, you know, advanced registered nurse practitioners or PAs, you know, going into aesthetic space, and they want to, you know, push on the AMA side for derms that derms should be the only one doing certain type of aesthetic procedures, but just because they're derms.
Yeah.
So they'll advocate for certain things,
but not others.
But not others, which is, you know, harmful to the general public.
So I was, for a while, I was on the executive council for the Hillsborough County Med Association, and I went to the Florida Medical Association meetings on several occasions. I've actually spoken there. And I've stopped because, and honestly, it's a waste of time. They don't focus on anything that what I would consider to be nitty gritty stuff that matters. And what's crazy to me is that they're flippant about things that should matter. For example, optometrists, okay? People at LensCrafters who are using a machine to determine if you could use sunglasses or not ophthalmologists, but optometrists are filing to be able to do blepharoplasty procedures.
Oh my gosh.
And when I tell you that it wasn't a blown unanimous no, it was like a margin, that should give everybody pause, you know? And so I don't understand it, to be honest with you. I really don't. I know there's a big component of a right to work and, you know, government regulating physicians and stuff. Like technically today, I'll probably get sued, but technically today, I could go and do cardiac surgery on somebody if the patient let me and if the hospital let me, okay? And if the hospital didn't let me, if I could convince somebody to let me crack their chest in my garage, as long as I have all the paperwork in order, that's not illegal, which is nuts, you know? Now, the reason why these people who are injecting Fix-A-Flat into people's butts in their living room, the reason why they're getting in trouble is because they don't have medical licenses and they're practicing medicine without a license, but they don't have anything in place for scope of practice encroachment.
Well, the challenge that we face, especially in the aesthetic, the industry, the beauty industry, whatever you want to call it, is that you have so many different disparate specialties. You've got nurse practitioners, you've got plastic surgeons, you've got RNs, you've got all these different, and they have their own regulation, right? There's the Board of Nursing, there's the Board of Medicine,
right?
And then there's their subspecialties within the Board of Medicine. So you've got this like complete crossing paths of things. But on the higher level, you do have MDs, you do have DOs, you do have different doctors who have a certain, let's just say, higher supervisory delegation type position, right?
Sure.
But what's happening with that, and I got into an argument with a firm out of state, attorneys out of state, on just pure injecting in Florida, who's allowed to inject. People don't realize that RNs aren't allowed to inject in Florida. There was a one-off case that came out that was very specific recently from the Board of Nursing, where a declaratory statement was issued for this specific nurse in a very specific order from a plastic surgeon to a patient based on her experience and what she presented, that in that instance she can inject. But it was a one-off.
Right.
But the firm was advocating for an international company that was doing training all over the United States under this guise of injection training to everyone, that so long as the physician is delegating the task to whoever it is, it's okay. And that's not true.
No.
At all.
Not in this state.
And not
in many states.
Not in many states, right? So we got into this discussion point, and thankfully I was able to rescue a physician that was contemplating doing this out of state. And I said to her, no way, this is crazy. You can't do this. I mean, they were bringing doctors from out of the country here to Florida, and they were used under the guise of, well, so long as you Texas doctor, in your judgment, tell this unlicensed doctor it's okay to inject this model, it's fine.
It's crazy.
And so it was just, I mean, and so I call it cowboys and Indians. There's no uniformity. Now, and the reason why I bring that up is clearly within the plastic field itself, there is uniformity. You've gone through it ad nauseum, what you had to go through to get certified. And then these cosmetic doctors, they don't have to go through. And I'm not saying that they may be good in a specific area itself, you know, by chance or by repetition, but there's no accountability.
And that's the problem, is that I'm going to use this word. It is the fraudulent insertion of confidence in the label, right? Because the label has no bearing to justify confidence. In my opinion, it has no bearing to justify confidence. Now, does that mean that this person is incapable of technically executing the procedure? Probably not, right? If you have enough training and enough experience, you're going to be able to do it. It doesn't mean you're going to understand the complications, how to avoid them, and how to treat them, but you can technically execute the operation. The problem is that the public is duped by hearing, oh, this person, they were board certified
Absolutely.
in the field that they're going to treat me in, right? I can't begin to explain to you like how many doctors I've met who have asked me, you know, well, there is a plastic surgeon. I'm like, no, that doctor is a cosmetic surgeon. Well, what's the difference? I'm like, you're a physician. Oh, really? I tell my patients to go there. It's like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's let's call it what it is. It's deceitful.
The state of California now, it's illegal to say just board certified. You have to specify what it's certified in, which is great. Now, it's still not super helpful in that if you say board certified in cosmetic surgery, people don't know that that's not necessarily something that's regulated by the American Board of Medical Subspecialties. They don't know what goes into becoming a board certified cosmetic surgeon, but at least it's something, right? It's a little bit less implied because you can see, is this a plastic surgeon or is this a cosmetic surgeon, right? I think that's a good start. They could at least monitor the marketing of it and have that be more, I don't know, forthright.
Yeah, yeah. It's just a terrible area. Joe, we talked a lot about the medical side of what you do. Obviously, what you do affects people positively. You're changing lives. It's transformative. But, you know, just like in any other industry, you know, you rely on other people. You have a team. You do things with a team. And what's interesting, we talked about this before we got on the podcast, and I want to bring it up for our listeners and our viewers. You know, I have a team that works with me, and I always tell my team that I'm only as good as the work that they produce. Peel the onion for our listeners and viewers as to how it works as a plastic surgeon in an OR room. In other words, you know, people have this preconceived idea that the doctor is running the show and walking into a room, gloves get on, they go in, they do their thing, and they leave. But obviously, that's not the case, especially the way you've set things up. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I rely heavily on my team, man. I mean, honestly, I'm nothing without my team. Like, nothing. All I am is just a dude who can cut and draw, right? So there are so many facets in getting a successful outcome in any surgery. Plastic surgery, yes, but in any operation. In any operation, everybody's got to be banging on the same cylinder, in tune, in harmony, in order to get a successful outcome in an efficient way. We talk about this in the OR, where my team will be like, yeah, but you're the doctor. They try to tell me, like, no, but this is, I'm like, listen, I can't do this without you guys. Like, I can't operate on this person without the anesthesiologist making sure that my patient is not only asleep and comfortable, but not bucking on the table and moving around while I'm making an incision on their skin in a very particular manner, right? If I don't have the instruments that I need, I can't do what I otherwise am trying to do, right? They say a bad carpenter blames their tools, but a good carpenter will tell you that you need good tools to do good work, period. You can't do good work that requires finesse and dexterity and detail with crappy tools. It's important for people to recognize that. And it's important for the team to understand that, so that they understand, like, you're important here. Like, so it's good that you're great at your job. You should take pride in your job, because without you, this whole thing crumbles. My team knows what I'm doing Thursday and Friday on Tuesday, and I don't. They know what cases I've got coming up. I know the day before. It's not common where I have to prepare that many days in advance, but they do. They know everything. They're all over it. You know, my wife had to have an operation done when she was pregnant with my firstborn son. My firstborn son had surgery when he was 4 weeks old.
Oh, wow.
I've had to have a major operation. My mother's a breast cancer survivor, father is melanoma and prostate cancer survivor. You know, I've been in the hot seat in that waiting room, and it sucks. And so I have my team update the family pretty much every hour. If a surgery is longer than 2 hours, I have them update every hour. If it's 2 hours, let them know when we're halfway through. That's important. It's important, I think, to make sure that the patient's family know that everything's going smoothly. And again, it helps to harness a lot of that team-based mentality. I don't even have to ask Lexi anymore. Like, I don't even ask her. She just updates every hour and communicates with the patient. If there's any issues or concerns from the patient, she'll communicate it with me. So there's an ongoing flow to the day to make sure that it's not just the patient on the table, but the family member outside, the spouse, the mom, the kid. Everybody knows, everybody's on the same page. You know, if I have a tech that's not focused on sterility, right, and I'm going to put an implant in and she drags something across the bottom of the drape that's not sterile, now I've got an infection, right? So yeah, that's on me because I am aware of everything that's happening in the operating room and I'm paying attention to that stuff. But, you know, that's a big component. If Lexi or if a circulating nurse contaminates something when she's handing it off onto the table, now the whole table is contaminated. And this patient gets an infection, right? If the anesthesiologist walks around and brushes up against the OR table and then it gets contaminated, now you have an infection.
The bottom line to all of this, and what I try to do, and I don't mean to interrupt you, but
No,
what I
it's okay.
try to do
I'll
is
go on forever.
I know, but what it's teamwork.
Teamwork all day.
And there is a ripple effect, like a pebble in a pond for somebody who doesn't do their job correctly, because it's going to affect somebody else.
Absolutely.
And so you've been able to filter out or ferret out the right individuals in their jobs, and key to it is preparation. Obviously.
Oh yeah.
I mean, you're talking about 3 days, 5 days a week, 2 weeks in advance with regard to what you're doing. So in anything in life, and I don't think sometimes people even realize that, preparation for anything
It's everything.
is key, especially in light of life-altering events such as a potential surgery, to ensure that everybody is aware, cognizant, responsible, competent to do what needs to be done. So is the team that you have a team that you've had over the years, you've developed and you utilize them and have confidence in them? It took time to create?
Absolutely. Yeah. It took a lot of time. It took a lot of energy. It took a lot of sleepless nights. I will tell you, I don't lose sleep much anymore at all. But when I lost sleep, the thing that would keep me up most nights for the longest amount of time was when there was an issue with a team member, more than anything. Patient complications, I've been very fortunate. I don't have many of those. Some of those have definitely kept me up at night.
Sure.
But the things that have made me lose sleep, like in perpetuity, where I just feel like I'm dragging myself across the finish line every day, is when I know I've got a problem with a team member, meaning that, you know, this team member is either malignant or something's happened where there's like a little bit of, where there's like friction or drama or concern. That keeps me up at night and messes with my zen, my focus, my happiness, like almost to the degree where if there's a problem at home, because of the magnitude of the impact that has on everything. It is, in my opinion, aside from the doctor-patient relationship, when it comes to the business, like your craft, your service, your product, whatever it is, that's got to be top notch. But aside from that, if your team is not in order, you may as well quit, in my opinion, because you cannot deliver this service, this product, this craft to the highest level of standards with a substandard team. You just can't. And so it's like being on a boat when you know there's a leak in the hull, and it should make you sweat, because if it doesn't, you will when you sink. You know what I mean?
So how do you deal with it? I mean, you're obviously the leader of the team. Do you have a hierarchy within the team itself in which, you know, there's an expectation of another team member to handle a situation if somebody below them is having an issue, or are you lateral with regard to your team? In other words, you're handling everybody individually.
It's, you know, that's in a constant state of flux for me. That's something that I've yet to master. So, you know, the history of my building was basically, you know, I shared space with another surgeon for a while and I shared their staff, but it was very apparent very quickly I needed my own team member. It was, I wasn't going to be able to do anything without my own team member. So I hired my own team member. That in and of itself created a bit of oomph in that office, but we got through it and went fine. And this team member was great. She was with me for years. And then we moved office locations to do our own thing. And I had to grow my own team, which I was really excited about.
Well, you have control.
Yeah, exactly. You know, but like most things, you know, where there's growth and change, there is pressure, like we were talking about. And with pressure comes some downsides. And I think that this person, no matter what I did, just saw all oncoming people as kind of a threat. And I mean, I gave this person a raise, told them every day how much I appreciated them. And there was just, I just couldn't get through, you know, and eventually this person became
the problem.
And that was really hard for me. I still think about it all the time because I didn't want it to go that way, but it was a problem.
But you dealt with it.
I've dealt with it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
I had to.
Yeah, you had to. And that's the part about, you know, running. We'll talk a little bit about your business too, right? It's the uncomfortable that you have to deal with sometimes, but everybody's watching.
And it was, yeah. And it came from, so part of it was, you know, as the business grew and I was juggling so many darn things, I started allocating responsibility and therefore leadership positions for this and that. I was still the head, I was still a capo, but each person was like, this person was in charge of this person was in charge of that. And I had one person in charge of PTO, pay time off. And if you wanted pay time off, or if you wanted to take a day off, you had to leave early, you had to cross it with this person. That was it. That was the rule. And this employee that I had had for a while just was blowing it off. And so, you know, I got the person who I put in charge of it reaching out to me saying, hey, I'm telling her she can't leave. And she left. I was like, well, now I have a decision to make as a boss, right? Is the authority I gave this person real or is it not? If it's real, this person walked off the job. They're gone. If I let this other person stay, then the authority I've just given this person is a wet napkin. It doesn't matter. It's fake, right? It's a facade. So I had to let her go because this authority that I bestowed on this person is real. And it's the only thing that she kind of held over people, but she didn't hold anything over because she still came to me half the time. She'd say, is this okay? I'd be like, yeah, okay, prove it, you know, because she felt a little uncomfortable. But the thing was like, that was her role. So I think that for me anyway, it is a challenge in setting up certain hierarchy because there has to be some hierarchy. I've run the business where everything was lateral, everything ran through me, and I have people who really hard workers, every one of them, hard worker, committed, honest, trustworthy. You would think that with a small group of like 3 people like that, it should just flow, right? If somebody needs to leave early, the other 2 ought to be cool with it. And you're like, yeah, we got you. And then, you know, I do you, you do me kind of thing. There's all kinds of stuff happening now because I didn't assume enough control or I didn't put somebody else in enough control over it. Like for me, I was like, oh, well, as long as the day goes well, patients are being communicated with, revenue's coming in the door, and everything is honest and good, you guys do what you want, right? Make sure that there's someone clinical who's here till 4 p.m. every day, and that's it. So if somebody can leave early, go ahead. I don't care because you're all salaried and you all work your tails off. I don't care if one of you leaves early here and there. That's a failure that I've learned as a leader. You can't do that.
No, you can't.
It breeds too much resentment. It breeds too much perception changes. And now I'm literally in the process of reining it in because that structure fails.
People
it failed
crave,
me anyway.
Yeah. People crave structure.
Yeah.
And you also have to be careful because if you allow certain behaviors to take place and then you want to restrict after the fact,
it's hard.
It's very difficult because people already have the expectation in place.
Yep.
And all these discussions that we're having, they never taught you that in medical school, did they?
Oh no, I'm learning as I'm tripping on the stone road.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy, isn't it? You know, they think that all of a sudden you're a doctor and then you know how to run a business. They're 2 totally different things, but there are similarities with regard to dealing with people, business models, leadership, structure, and people hate change. People, for whatever reason, have a certain discomfort with, having to listen to somebody else, especially if it's a new person coming in.
Oh, yeah.
Without having that sense of trust that gets developed over time because people tend to be a little bit protective over their space and what's going on. And, this is one of the things that we talk about on the podcast. They don't teach you this stuff in school. This is on the fly. You learn, you listen, you read books, you figure out different ways to motivate people because at the end of the day, you're accountable.
Yep.
And everybody is watching you. And when I mean everybody, your team is watching how you're going to respond to a particular negative circumstance.
Even if it has nothing to do with them.
Yeah,
Yep.
of course, because they want to make sure you have their backs and your patients. There's going to be a perception with regard to your patients as far as how your staff is interacting among themselves and what they may observe.
Totally.
So there's a reflection on you in what you do predicated on how you lead. And there are some leaders that have a tendency to put their head in the sand, hoping that things will just figure itself out.
Oh, it will, but it's not going to go the way you want.
Exactly. It's not going to be positive. So that's just like another layer that gets thrown at us as business owners and entrepreneurs where, okay, not only do I have to deal with how I'm going to build this widget and do a great job with this widget, I got to handle all the people that are going to help me deal with the widget.
Yeah.
I do have to say, from my perspective, being able to have some of my staff, well, most of my staff work from home has been helpful in that there's less interaction or drama that you may get. When I had a large practice and I had a lot of people interacting, there was too many pulls in other directions that were distracting from the work at hand. Now, you also have to find a unique individual that has the ability and the discipline to work from home as well.
That's
and we had
my question.
we had to filter through that as well. But when you do get somebody and they're appreciative of what they have, they figure it out on how to navigate it, and it's a win-win once that's accomplished.
How do you gauge that? How do you gauge how much work they're doing? Obviously, there's productivity that you can see, but there's got to be intangible ways for them to take advantage and for you to monitor.
There's a level of accountability throughout the work product that you'll be able to see, and also activity that is timelined in real time, whether interacting, because during the day you're interacting ongoing, whether it be through Messenger, through Zoom, through just different models. They just happen to be at a different location.
Sure.
So from that perspective, it works out well. But it doesn't work for somebody that is easily distracted, for somebody that may have other family members that are at home that may be retired or not, need them and pull them away. So and we went through
baby.
Yeah, a baby. Well, it could work depending upon how that would work out with a baby. But what I've noticed more so is that if one of the partners is retired and the other one is working, the one that's retired tends to pull away, pull on the one that's working. And so
because they've got time.
They've got the time. So
yeah.
So you've kind of got to filter out who works well, and you have to make that decision. And it's not for everybody, and it's also not for every business.
Sure.
And it's worked out well in my small little world that of the work that I'm doing. But I'm also blessed. I've got a great team. So and it took time to get to that point with the team. You have to trust, but you also have to lay out expectations.
Sure.
You have to be able to ensure that there's accountability for what they're doing and they know what they're doing, and they're free to ask questions. This is one of the big topics that I get into on the podcast. You need to have an open area where there's a feeling of acceptance in any question. But I don't like people who don't try to figure out things on their own. They need to first try.
Yes.
I'm not asking them to reinvent the wheel. I want them to troubleshoot, use their analytical thinking, do what needs to be done before coming to me to lean on a particular issue. But I'm not going to chastise somebody who's tried, in that regard. But again, that's all part of the process. It's kind of organic in a way where you're going back and forth. And in the beginning, it doesn't matter because of your role. You as the doctor, me as the attorney, whoever we bring on, they're going to look at us in a certain way. Oh, he's the boss per se. So there's going to be an automatic, I don't want to say a stigma, but there's going to be a feeling of this person it's his business. I may be paralyzed a little bit in the beginning because I don't know this person.
From an approachability perspective?
Sure. And then it takes you as the leader to kind of diffuse that and let them feel comfortable that, oh, wow, he's different
Right.
than the others that I've dealt with. Oh, wow. And that's not to say it's a kumbaya session. We're all going to play and do whatever the hell we want. No, there's
Sure.
accountability. But for me personally, the way I run my practice is that I want people to be in a forum and in an environment that's healthy, where they can balance their lives and everybody can prosper, but there's accountability. And people need that, I think. I think in order to feel valuable.
Feel valuable and feel capable. I've always believed in a good team, but I think that I didn't really truly appreciate the full value that a team can have until I had the first employee I ever hired who just always said my 3 favorite words to hear. I've got it. Like I was like, what was that? There no what? She's like, I'm going to figure it out. I got it. I was like, oh my God, that's amazing. You know what I mean? And now that I have that taste, it's the same. You know, I have no problem, but I was like too approachable when I started. So anything I delegated, I'd be like, you can ask me anything. And people would come to me where they were almost paralyzed from doing things on their own. And I would tell them, like, just go try. And like, no, but I'd rather just ask you. But then I had this one employee who was like, I've got it. And I realized, like, oh my gosh, like having a team that's autonomous, number one, you're going to get ideas that you wouldn't think of yourself, which is great. Number two, they're going to get more done because now they're not having to pause to ask me something. They're going to do it. They're on to the next thing that they will then take care of by themselves. And they just take care of stuff.
Well, it's the classic discussion, that little story about, teaching somebody how to fish, versus, you put in the hook
all day.
It's just one of those things where, you do empower them and then you're able to move on, but that's the fight, I think, that a lot of owners, business people have. They're control freaks too.
You can.
And you have to find that balance, and you have to trust, and they're going to earn it. They're going to show you, let people show you who they are, right? People always say that, even with friendships and interactions socially. I always tell my wife, I said, well, they showed you who they were. I mean,
right.
Why, if the leopard has spots, I think the leopard has the spots, right? If the leopard has the spots, it's probably a leopard. Why you want to think it's a tiger?
Right.
It's just, I hate to be so blunt about stuff, but it just goes to saying in life that with staff and with people that you're working with, you know what you want and you know what you don't want. And it just takes that confidence and the leadership acumen to be able to make those decisions. Now, we talk about this idea. You've learned grind, discipline. I mean, you obviously went to medical school. You've gone through all these critical layers to get to where you are, working your butt off. You've got your practice now, which, you're running your own business, which obviously we talked about that, you didn't learn that in school, and you're doing your thing. So you're living high, you're doing so well. You've got your kids, you're trying to teach your children, consequences, life, especially at their age. They're young now and dealing with that. And then you had a traumatic event that hit you like a ton of bricks. And so when we talk about, life and things that are going on well in life, sometimes what happens is that we, I don't want to say take it for granted, but as we move forward in life, we think everything's going smooth and we should be fine. And we don't necessarily plan for something that may not be something we want. Obviously, I know a little bit about it, but talk a little bit about, not only one of the challenges you faced recently, but how you dealt with it.
Sure. To summarize this for people who might be listening or watching, I got hit with a health issue that required me to have a major operation, and I had to essentially shut my business down for 3 months. And as a single income dad who is basically the production of my own business, that could have been very devastating. And this is going to sound psychotic. I look at it as a very positive experience. And the reason I'm able to look at it that way is all because of things that were in place beforehand. Money's one of the things, but there's so many aspects of it. So I pray. And I found myself one night, I was praying for something, and then it hit me. I don't know what it was. I was just like, you know what? Why am I feel like I'm always praying and asking. I was like, you know what? Instead, I'm only going to thank. I'm only going to thank when I pray, and I'm going to be grateful for things. I'm going to pick something out to be grateful for every single night before I go to sleep. So I had a guttural laugh with my kids today. Like, we laughed so hard our guts hurt. Thank you for that. I've got an amazing team right now that makes my life so much easier than it would be without them. Thank you for that. And doing that every night changed it changed my habitual tendencies to go straight toward negative, whether it's negative expectations of what might happen, negative perceptions on things that have happened. It started shifting my whole outlook. And so I really started developing a genuinely positive outlook. Now, growing up, I had almost no self-confidence in most aspects in life. I had a relatively negative, cynical outlook on pretty much everything, like everything. I was superstitious. I hardcore believed in jinxes. Like that stuff was like law as far as I'm concerned. As far as I was concerned, I hardcore believed in jinxes. Woe was me stuff. This stuff always happens to me. Like all that stuff.
Victim, like you were victim.
Victim,
huh?
Yeah. Classic negative thinker. But a hard worker. And I would think positive, like for other people. Positive's cool for other people, but not me. That was kind of my mentality. And I didn't like it. I got sick of it. And so I was like, you know what? I'm just going to start with gratitude for what I've got. And
when did you make that change? You obviously had to have confidence in yourself to do certain things as you journeyed through life.
It's hard to explain. I would do things because deep down I felt like I should be able to do it. You know what I mean? But I would always doubt myself along the way. It was kind of like that classic mentality is if you don't expect yourself to succeed, then you won't be disappointed. But really what you find is that, and then you succeed in spite of yourself. But what you find is that if you doubt yourself and you succeed, you're almost just like, oh, okay, well, I didn't fail. You're not really enjoying the flavor of the fruit you just got. You're just glad it's not poison, right?
Yeah.
And that's no fun way to go through anything.
Well, I always tell people, try to enjoy the journey.
The journey, it's so important.
You're on the journey. Instead of dealing with the end result, stay in the moment for the journey.
Fitness taught me that.
Yeah.
There's no destination. And so in my mind, I had this vision of myself with cap, delts, big pecs, wide lat, V, and I realized years later, because like as I said, I was in great shape in my 20s, but not a lot of self-confidence. It all came from insecurities. And I look back at those photos and I was like, holy crap. I was constantly trying to get to somewhere. I was there. I was too stupid and negative on myself to realize.
Oh, we could talk this out for days. I mean, being bodybuilders are the worst. I mean,
oh my God,
we self-analyze. Yeah, body dysmorphia to the nth degree. It's you're never satisfied. And for me, it wasn't until I got older that I came to terms with a lot of that. And it's a marathon. It's not necessarily a sprint. And you see all these young kids, especially on social media, or if you go to a local gym, you see cameras everywhere and they're taping and they're taking.
I pity the youthful generation with social media and expectations now, man. Oh, man, it's got to be brutal.
And I'm sure we could talk about how, even for you and your practice, I mean, I try to move a little bit away from medicine for you, but even its impact your practice. And I'm sure you've got patients with unrealistic expectations that come in to see you and they see these like cartoonish characters and things on social media. And you're like, well, that's filtered to the nth degree. I mean, Kristen sees it in the practice all the time where she's like, what do you want to look like that for?
I rein it in a lot for them. Yeah. So the positive attitude aspect of it really was one of the main things. That was one of the main things that made that entire process much more tolerable from me. That was my favor I did myself. You look at it and you say, okay, so I had the mentality that I think I should have had for it. But the things which I was very fortunate for, where I feel blessed, was that, I had my wife. I had my business. My business was in order. And what does that mean? I had a team that I knew would be able to handle communicating with patients about moving things around without necessarily scaring the hell out of people. And I also knew that I had appropriate insurances in place because I was blessed with having amazing teachers growing up. And one of my professors in residency was a plastic surgeon. Her name is Dr. Vasco, who had a devastating injury that pulled her out of work for, it was like 6 to 9 months or something like that. And she got back on her feet and she had a practice waiting for her when she got back, partly because she had partners, also because she had an established business with a good reputation in place already, but also because she had insurance policies in place that I had never heard of. And she took it upon herself and came and gave us a lecture in residency about these things, basically saying, just like you said, you don't expect the unexpected, but I want you guys to know how important it is to have overhead disability insurance in addition to, say, like short-term and long-term disability insurance. I'm like, what the heck is overhead disability insurance? Well, overhead disability insurance will reimburse you for your overhead for the time that you're not working, so you don't have to go out and find a brand new team, so that you don't default on your lease if you're renting your office space and get kicked out and evicted. I mean, all of these things are real impacts, right? If I stop operating and I've got no revenue, then I can't pay my staff. I can't pay the mortgage payments on my office, in addition to everything else. All that overhead keeps going. The clock keeps going. The clock doesn't get sick, right? Your overhead doesn't get sick. And so I had all that in place. I paid my staff their full salary for the 3 months that I wasn't working, and I didn't have to bat an eye about it, partly because I had cash reserve. Oh, that's the other component. Not having had a ton of money most of my life, I didn't spend a lot. First 6-7 years of my practice, we spent like nothing, man. I mean, I just saw a picture I'm carving a pumpkin in my front yard of the 1,600 square foot home that I just moved out of 5 months ago. And behind me was my Nissan Altima with oxidized paint, and the driver's side door handle wiggled when you opened it. I mean, I used to have to park that thing around the block because I didn't want patients seeing me walking in and out of the building from it, because I didn't want people thinking like, oh, this guy's starving. Of course he'll say anything to book surgery.
Yeah.
But the truth of the matter was I had no payments on it, which means it was paid for. I had no debt. It worked, and I didn't feel the need to spend that money. And the house that we were in was very tight for, a family of 4 with 2 growing kids, with a lot of load-bearing walls all over the place that they railed their heads into regularly. But we didn't need more space. We're an intimate family. We're very close. So we saved and saved and saved. And as a sole proprietor, my business cash flow through and profit and overflow is basically my taxable income. Honestly, I leave it all, most of it, in the business side because I don't want to be tempted to spend it. Because of that, even if I wasn't reimbursed by the insurance for overhead, I had enough to pay my staff.
Well, you're bringing up so many interesting points, and it's pretty interesting that you actually had a mentor or teacher, somebody expose you to areas of insurance that a lot of people they don't understand. They don't even know it exists.
I had no idea that it existed.
And talk about a godsend blessing for you in that regard. But the other area that you touch on, especially with people in general, is this idea of I deserve it. This idea of I've worked my ass off, I deserve it. I'm a doctor, I should be able to get this. I'm a professional, I should be able to get that. And what ends up happening is that they justify it, and then the tail ends up wagging the dog. And what I mean by that is then instead of living your life and practicing medicine or doing what your passion may be as an entrepreneur or business person, you're servicing your debt. You're servicing a lifestyle that you put yourself in based on emotional decisions and a lack of either awareness, discipline, understanding. I mean, it goes on because money and the way people handle money is such an emotional element.
Oh, totally.
My guests that I get on the show that I talk with, the majority of my guests have started essentially with nothing. They've worked their way up. And even when they were doing well, they weren't squandering. They were always concerned. My wife is much more fiscally responsible than I am. I will admit that. But my wife had to come to terms with how she was going to be with regard to when we opened up the practice. She didn't want to have debt. She said it straight out. Yeah, I could have, 10, 15 lasers. I can have all this stuff, but I'm not going to be able to sleep at night. You did your workaround. You knew that, there, unfortunately, in your industry, there's a perception of that you want your doctor to be doing well. Your fiscal responsibility could be used as a sword against you, believe in your particular business, because of the fact that, well, wait a minute, he's not driving a nice car. Maybe he's going to tell me that I need all these things so he can get a nice car. Well, if he's been practicing for X amount of years now, I don't think the car is his driving force. You know what I mean?
That's right.
But it's just that whole, you can unravel this from an emotional standpoint, but you did have the planets aligning for you, unbeknownst to yourself, by planning what you did to be able to put yourself in the position of continuity.
Yeah. And part of that too, I mean, there's a book I read called Profit First. And it helped me because I had no idea what to do with money, right? When money started coming in from the business, I'm like, what the hell do I do with this stuff, right? And so for my first couple of years, from a disciplinary perspective, I created 4 bank accounts. operating expense, owner's pay, taxes, profit. And no matter what revenue came in every month, I would divvy up the gross revenue between these accounts. And so the advice from this book was, if you can run your business off 100% of your revenue, you should be able to run it off 90. And so 10% of all my gross revenue just went into this profit account and pretended it wasn't there. And then I think it was 40%. Took 40% of the gross revenue, put it right in the tax account. And then I took 30% and put it into owner's pay. And what's left over, I should be able to run my business off of that. And that's exactly how I ran it.
Well, everybody's margins are different.
Everyone's margins
right?
are different.
But this is
for
what
my
worked
business
for you.
Correct, for my business. And I was, and I did this knowing that I would tweak things if I needed to. But the idea was that I was going to prioritize the profit, the 10% first, which was the savings that would be used either for rainy day fund or for capital investment and growth. That's the only purpose of the profit account. That's it. Taxes, I gotta pay taxes. And then if there was one bucket I didn't fill, it would be owner's pay. I was going to pay myself last. And I know that there's different schools of thought on, as a business owner, pay yourself first, pay yourself last.
That worked for you.
This worked for me. It worked really well for me because otherwise I was like, I would just see this chunk of money and like, how do I allocate this? What do I save? What do I not save? So it was a starting point.
Let me back up because I don't even think we covered this. Did you always know you wanted to run your own business as a doctor?
Not necessarily. I think maybe deep down, my wife says she's always known that I needed to run my own business. And the proof is in the pudding. Every place that I have worked as an employee, there was something that would frustrate me. And if it frustrated me, I would work to change it. And I'll give you an example. My program director, Greg Pearson, if you're listening to this, I love you. And I'm sorry for any hair loss I caused in you, my friend. I drove him crazy. Dr. Pearson, I drove him absolutely just batshit crazy. Interns are supposed to sit there and keep their mouths shut. Junior residents, you're supposed to keep your mouth shut. Even as you become a senior resident, you should be happy that you're standing where you're standing, okay? As a junior resident, a friend of mine, Justin Harper, and I, Justin was a year behind me, we saw our program as a really good program, but it could be phenomenal by the way the rotations were structured. So Justin and I really dug down. We went into the electronic medical record system, and what we found was that the general surgery program had 3.8 residents per case that was done in a 3-year period. The plastic surgery department had 15 cases per resident. That means that the vast majority of the plastic surgery cases were not covered. Major learning opportunity, okay? So we brought all this to our program director. We rewrote the entire curriculum. Pearson squashed it. He was like, this isn't happening. Only because we thought it was paramount to us becoming the best we could be, we went over his head and we went to the chair and he loved it. Then he told the program director that we needed to work on implementing this and he stonewalled it again. So we went to the RRC and the RRC came in and said, these are all reasonable things. We pissed off everybody. Justin and I.
Oh yeah, you played with the status quo.
We pissed off everybody. And it came back to bite me. And I don't care because I will tell you that if you talk to any attendings at Ohio State, our class, because of the changes that were implemented, they say that our class was like some of the best residents they've ever seen uniform across a residency class because our training was unreal. It was unreal. We were doing everything. You
dove deep into a subject, but the bottom line I'm taking from all this is the fact that you were not a quiet student.
No.
You were incredibly analytical, and you also didn't like the status quo or the concept of following all the rules just because.
Just because.
And you had a desire to do the right thing, and you were earnest, and you wanted to learn. But you also weren't going to just take no for an answer because somebody was in a position. So you have that streak in you, which obviously segues into independence. You basically, as your own boss, you're setting your own rules. So,
right.
So you obviously, like you said, you live by the sword, you die by the sword. But your circumstance, so that was in you, that was instilled in you. You were dealing with it in med school.
Status quo, I'm fine with it. If status quo makes sense.
At the end of the day, you came to terms with the fact you got to run your own shop.
Yeah.
And that would, and some people find out, I found, you know, for me, it was later in life. I went in and out of different positions. I got subjected to a position that I think I may have been I was in my mid 30s. I was in an executive position for an insurance company, and I didn't understand this idea of territorial protection and politics that a corporation may have.
Brutal. Yeah.
And it's brutal. And I had no idea. I just was like you know, in med school, this doesn't make sense. Why don't we do it this way or this or that? And, you know, you had to stay in your lane in that particular field. And I didn't like that. So when I got into, you know, private practice, back into private practice, and now having my own shop, I mean, we like you said, we live by this, you know, the revenue's ours. If it's good, it's good. If it's not good, it's not good, but it's ours. And we make the decisions and we're accountable. And I wouldn't want it any other way. It's very lonely at times for business owners, entrepreneurs, in the position that they're in. And the podcast in part is to share and move the curtain away so people can understand what we all go through and that they may be going through. The uncomfortable decisions you have to make with staff, the monetary decisions that need to be made for whatever reason, dealing with people in conflict, balancing your personal life and things like that. So with the challenges that you faced, unbeknownst to you with that teacher coming in and talking about this insurance thing, you know, fast forward down the road, bam, you have it in place. So you have continuity. And I think that what happens to all of us in these industries, whatever you're in, you don't think about something that could happen to you. You're not thinking along the lines of, you know, the train's going to stop, or I may not be able to do this, or medically something may happen. You know, you're just moving forward, and you need to be mindful, especially if you have a family, especially if you've got kids and your own business. You need to step out of your own way and ensure that you have something in place to protect in the event of that unknown.
You're right. You almost have to be short-sighted in some ways to be an entrepreneur, because if you overthink too far in advance, you can paralyze yourself.
Oh, absolutely,
right?
Yeah.
So it's like, there's definitely a balance where you have to have the sprinter ADD mentality of, I see, I want, I do, but you have to keep that long-term scope in the back of your mind, in my opinion, because I think that long-term scope for some people can be rather daunting. You know, you have to have both. You have to be short-sighted to go and take action, but you have to keep that long-term view in place. Now, the thing that happened to me, you know, being able to prepare for that, really, as you said, it was kind of like an accident. It was, and part of it was listening too, right? I heard somebody with experience who I trust and admire give a piece of advice. I took it and I acted on it. I made sure that I was always good to my wife and appreciated her. And there I get nailed with a major health issue, and boom, I've got an angel here on this earth that's by my side all day, every day. She slept in the hospital with me for 2 months. You know, which made the entire process bearable. Like, not even, it was just, that was my day to day, you know, and it was fine. It wasn't miserable. I mean, it was miserable, but I don't look at that and get sick to my stomach or anything like that.
And some people would, but you had things in place, and obviously you have a supportive spouse that's there for you through the whole process. I just want to thank you for coming on. I mean, this talk's been great. We've been going probably one of the longest podcasts we've done, which has been awesome. Two Jersey guys,
Jersey strong, baby.
But I appreciate it all, and I, you know, with regard to the practice, we wish you the best of luck. And everybody, if you like this video, please hit the like button. If you like the podcast, please subscribe, and remember, everyone, keep it pro to pro. That's all for today's episode of Pro to Pro. I hope you enjoyed hearing from our guests and gained some valuable insights into the world of entrepreneurship. Like and subscribe to stay up to date with the latest episodes, and don't forget to follow us on social media. Thanks for watching and listening, and remember to keep it pro to pro.